Can you believe they tried to stop a CEO with a $48 million contract from boarding his first-class flight, all because of a single glance that screamed prejudice? There was nothing out of place about Dorian Brandt that crisp morning at JFK's. Terminal 4, his suit was impeccably pressed, his collar sat perfectly against his neck, and he moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to early mornings and high-stakes meetings. In his left hand, he clutched a sleek, dark leather garment bag. In his right, a first-class boarding pass for a San Francisco flight, where he was set to deliver a keynote speech at the prestigious Western Produce Sustainability Summit. At 58, Dorian had navigated this routine countless times, a master of understated efficiency who never craved the spotlight. But oh, how the air crackled with tension the moment he approached gate 171717. The boarding line hadn't even formed yet, just a handful of passengers lingered, sipping overpriced coffee or scrolling mindlessly on their phones. Dorian strode to the desk, offered a polite nod to the young gate agent, and handed over his boarding pass, expecting the usual quick scan and go. But wait, what was this? The agent didn't scan it. Instead, she stared at him, then stared again, her eyes lingering in that awkward, hesitant way people do when they're deciding whether to speak or stall. Dorian stood there, unruffled, no hint of impatience in his posture, no flicker of doubt in his steady gaze. "This lane is for premium passengers only," she snapped, her tone sharper than a winter wind, completely mismatched to the moment. "I know," Dorian replied, his voice as even as a calm sea. She blinked, finally scanned the boarding pass, but then paused. Her hand hovered over the scanner, refusing to click. Instead, she glanced at him, then darted her eyes to a colleague behind her, whispering something that made the other woman peek over her shoulder like they were unraveling a mystery. Dorian didn't flinch, not even a twitch. The agent turned back, her voice now tinged with a challenge. "I'm going to need to see some ID." He tilted his head ever so slightly, a subtle question in the gesture. "You don't usually ask for ID when scanning a pass. Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone still composed, but oh, the weight of that question. She hesitated, fumbling for words. "It's just a security measure," she said. But Dorian knew better. There was no such policy at the gate, and she knew it too. With a quiet sigh, he reached into his inside pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his driver's license. She took it like it was a foreign object, holding it awkwardly before setting it on the desk without even scanning it. "Wait here for a moment," she instructed, her voice clipped. Dorian glanced down at his boarding pass, his name printed in bold, clear letters, Dorian Brandt. He said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. The gate agent stepped a few feet away, whispering again, this time to someone in a dark uniform. Within moments, a security officer was striding toward them, his presence looming like a storm cloud. Dorian had been here before, not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. That jarring shift from professionalism to suspicion, the moment someone decided he didn't belong, not because of anything he said or did, but because they couldn't fathom a man like him in first class. How could they be so blind? The security officer didn't bother with questions. He just stood beside Dorian, silent, his eyes scanning him like a human risk assessment checklist. But Dorian, cool as ever. He stepped back from the gate, moving to the side, away from the boarding lane, refusing to give them the drama they seemed to expect. No arguments, no raised voice, no performance to feed their assumptions. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made one call that would change everything. It rang once, twice, then, "Maggie, it's me," he said, his voice steady as steel. "I need you to pull up the catering contract we signed with Horizon Air 2 weeks ago, the one covering their western routes. Yeah, I'm standing at JFK, gate 17. I'll hold." He stayed on the line, his eyes fixed straight ahead, no trace of emotion, no hint of frustration. The gate agent glanced over, suddenly aware he was still there, her confidence wavering. She leaned into the mic on her desk, her voice tight. "We're just working through a minor issue," she announced to the growing crowd of passengers now lining up behind him. "Thanks for your patience." Patience? Ha! No one was patient. A businessman in a gray pullover leaned forward, his whisper cutting through the air like a knife. "Is he causing trouble or something?" Dorian heard it, clear as day, but didn't turn around. Oh, the strength it took to stay still. Maggie's voice came back on the phone, sharp and efficient. "Got it. You want me to call corporate or—" "No," Dorian cut in softly, his words deliberate. "Just flag it. I think they're about to recognize a problem." He hung up, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and stood there, boarding pass still in hand, as calm as if he were waiting for an elevator. But that call? It wasn't a complaint, it was a warning, a quiet signal that the airline was about to face the consequences of their mistake. Dorian Brandt hadn't always worn tailored suits or flown first class. Can you imagine? He grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, in a modest home with creaky floorboards and mornings filled with the clamor of family life. His mother, Eunice, worked tirelessly in the produce section of a local grocery store, while his father, Leonard, juggled grueling night shifts at the mill and spent weekends fixing neighbors' cars to make ends meet. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table, and young Dorian learned early that how you carry yourself matters. Oh, how those lessons shaped him. At just 15, he was up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays, helping his mother sort through crates of fruits and vegetables before the store opened. Picture it, a teenager learning to judge a melon's ripeness by touch, spotting a spoiled apple from 10 feet away, and, most crucially, mastering the art of talking to people not at them, but to them. There's a difference, and Dorian figured it out fast. By 23, he graduated from Kent State with a degree in agricultural business and a modest $330. To his name, not bad for a kid from Mansfield. His first venture? A humble roadside produce stand just outside Columbus. No employees, not even part-time help, just a borrowed pickup truck, a weathered tent, and a fierce determination to sell sweet corn like it was pure gold. Can you feel the hustle? The real game changer came in his early 30s when Dorian spotted an opportunity others overlooked: sustainably grown, regionally sourced produce that could scale to meet the demands of major grocery chains without sacrificing quality. Not some boutique farmer's market gimmick, just real, clean, fast-delivered food. Brandt Global Foods was born in a rented garage with one delivery route and a laptop that crashed twice a week. Talk about starting from the ground up. He forged deals directly with Midwest farms, slowly building a network that would change the game. It took nearly 15 years of grit and persistence before his company earned a seat at the table with national suppliers. Today, Brandt Global Foods supplies over 30 high-end grocery chains, 5 university systems, and guess who? Horizon Air. How's that for a glow-up? The airline had come to him, desperate to revamp their in-flight meals after a barrage of bad press and dismal customer surveys. Dorian didn't dazzle them with a flashy pitch. He listened, then delivered a plan that was pure genius. Seasonal produce rotations, direct farm to airline sourcing, and packaging that slashed waste by half. They signed a jaw-dropping $48 million contract, but Dorian never forgot his roots. His office in Dayton? No awards or plaques cluttering the walls, just framed photos of that original produce stand and a wall adorned with heartfelt thank you notes from farmers. His assistant, Maggie, handled the logistics, but Dorian, he was all about the people. He despised drama, shunned attention, and never boasted about power. He just wielded it quietly when the moment called for it. So when that gate agent at JFK scrutinized his face more than his boarding pass, and the security guard treated him like a threat rather than a valued customer, It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a stinging reminder. No matter how many contracts he signed or planes he stocked with fresh produce, some people only saw what they expected to see. And when you don't fit their mental image, they start digging for reasons to doubt you. How exhausting is that? But Dorian didn't need to shout to prove his worth. His life's work spoke louder than words. That call at Gate 17 wasn't the start of a problem. It was his way of giving the airline a chance to fix their mistake before it spiraled. Because Dorian Brandt believed in grace, but he also believed in standards, high ones. Yet at that moment, none of it mattered to the gate agent, a woman named Haley, in her mid-30s, new to the job and eager to prove herself after transferring from Tulsa to JFK just a month earlier. She had strict orders: maintain order, follow protocol, and don't let anyone bend the rules. But what she lacked was experience and instinct, the kind that lets you read a person or a situation without jumping to conclusions. Oh, Haley, what were you thinking? By now, passengers were lining up, their impatience palpable. A man in a Navy windbreaker, Bluetooth headset glued to his ear, paced near the front. A woman with a floral carry-on stood behind him, her eyes narrowing at the delay. Haley adjusted the mic on her collar, muttering something about needing backup. She glanced at Dorian, who stood off to the side, relaxed, yet undeniably present. Her coworker, Mia, leaned over, her tone laced with concern. Is there actually an issue? Haley shrugged, dismissive. He says he's first class. Mia raised an eyebrow, checking the pass. His pass says he is. What's the problem? Haley frowned, her voice low. It just doesn't feel right. Really? Mia's posture shifted just a subtle lean, but enough to scream, "Be careful!" But Haley was too caught up, staring at her screen, pretending to search for a non-existent booking note. The security officer, meanwhile, stood nearby, arms crossed, glancing at Dorian periodically, but offering no explanation for his presence. Why was he even there? Passengers kept boarding, the first-class lane thinning, but Haley's nerves were fraying. She shot a glance at the gate, desperate to save face. Then Dorian's phone rang and he stepped a few feet away to answer it. Maggie's voice was steady, all business. Okay, I've already sent an alert to their regional VP. I also looped in Jack Rena. He's the head of food service integration on their end. Thank you, Dorian said quietly, his calm unshaken. Keep me posted. He hung up, his face expressionless, the epitome of composure. Back at the desk, Mia was growing uneasy. She pulled Haley aside, her whisper urgent. Do you realize who he is? That's Dorian Brandt. I saw his company on the vendor list last week, the new produce deal with Horizon. Haley's stomach plummeted. Wait, what? She gasped, her confidence crumbling. Yeah, he owns Brandt Global Foods. They're working with us. Haley's mouth went dry, her eyes darting to Dorian, who stood there, boarding pass in hand, no trace of anger, no hint of confrontation. How had she misjudged him so badly? The moment hung heavy, the air thick with tension. Passengers were grumbling louder now, their frustration spilling over. Mia leaned closer to Haley, her voice a mix of warning and disbelief. You need to fix this now. But Haley was frozen, her mind racing, her earlier certainty replaced by a sinking dread. Dorian, meanwhile, stood like a pillar of strength, his silence more powerful than any outburst. What would happen next? Would the airline realize their mistake? Or would this escalate into something far bigger? One thing was clear. Dorian Brandt wasn't just a passenger, he was a force. And Gate 17 was about to learn that the hard way. Oh, can you imagine the sheer panic at Gate 17 when Mia realized the colossal mistake unfolding right before her eyes? She was getting seriously uncomfortable, her gut twisting as she pulled Haley aside, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Do you even realize who he is? She hissed, her eyes wide with urgency. That's Dorian Brandt. I saw his company on the vendor list last week, the massive new produce deal with Horizon. Haley's stomach lurched, a wave of nausea hitting her like a freight train. Wait, what? She gasped, her voice barely a squeak. Yeah, Mia pressed, her words sharp. He owns Brant Global Foods. They're working with us. His company's practically the backbone of our in-flight meals. Haley's mouth went dry, her throat tightening as she stole a glance at Dorian, who hadn't budged an inch. There he stood, boarding pass still in hand, his face a mask of calm, no anger, no confrontation, just an unshakable presence that made her feel smaller by the second. How could she have gotten this so wrong? Maybe we should just board him now, Mia suggested, her tone laced with a desperate hope to salvage the situation. But Haley? She was spiraling. No, if we do it now, it looks like we... Her words were cut off by a sharp voice crackling through her earpiece, a supervisor, and he sounded anything but pleased. Haley, the first need a status on the hold at Gate 17. We're showing a delay flag. She froze, her heart pounding like a drum. Just handling a passenger issue, she stammered, but it's under control. Under control? Ha! The supervisor wasn't buying it. Make sure it is, he snapped. We've got execs from corporate flying in this morning. No surprises? No surprises? Oh, Haley was already knee-deep in a disaster she'd created. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady them, her eyes darting back to Dorian. His unshakable calm was like a spotlight, exposing her every mistake. She wasn't just dealing with a problem, she was becoming one. Mia, sensing the chaos, turned toward Dorian, ready to offer a heartfelt apology, but just then, the boarding door beeped, jarring the tense silence. Another passenger stepped through, a man in khakis who glanced back with a scowl. What's going on with this holdup? He demanded, his voice dripping with irritation. Haley's voice had vanished, swallowed by her rising panic. She couldn't even muster a response. Then, Dorian moved not toward the desk, but toward the glass wall overlooking the runway, his steps slow and deliberate. Can you picture it? Hands folded behind his back, he stood there, gazing out at a line of luggage carts trundling past, completely unruffled. He wasn't in a rush, wasn't anxious, he was letting time work its magic in his favor. Meanwhile, Haley was watching her own time run out, her confidence crumbling like a house of cards. How could one man's silence be so deafening? But up above, the real power players were already springing into action. 10 floors above the chaotic terminal, in a sleek office with a jaw-dropping view of the tarmac and the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond, Cynthia Reyes was savoring a buttery croissant and flipping through a quarterly operations report when her desk phone rang. She didn't usually bother with unknown numbers, but this one had been forwarded twice, and her assistant had flagged it as urgent. This is Cynthia, she answered, her tone crisp. On the other end, Maggie Geller's voice was all business. Hi, Cynthia. Maggie Geller calling on behalf of Dorian Brant, CEO of Brant Global Foods. We've just been alerted to an incident involving Mr. Brant at Gate 17. Cynthia sat up straighter, her croissant forgotten. What kind of incident? She asked, her pulse quickening. Your staff seems to have denied him boarding despite his first-class ticket, Maggie replied, her professionalism unwavering. We're concerned it may escalate. Escalate. Oh, that was an understatement. Cynthia didn't waste a second. She knew Dorian's name and the massive stakes tied to it. Horizon Air had just finalized its supplier contracts for the next fiscal year, and Brant Global Foods wasn't just any vendor, they were the vendor. The key to overhauling the airline's tarnished food service image after a brutal social media campaign had exposed their subpar frozen meals and wasteful packaging. This wasn't just a customer service blunder, it was a ticking bomb in a room full of dynamite. I'll handle it, Cynthia said, her voice firm as she stood, already grabbing her jacket. Is he still at the gate? He is, Maggie confirmed, calm but clearly being mishandled. Cynthia was halfway out the door, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She spun to her assistant, urgency in her eyes. Get me Sean and Elise from Brand Protection now. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, at Horizon's corporate headquarters, Jack Renaud was in the middle of a working lunch when his phone buzzed. Jack, Maggie's voice cut through, skipping all formalities. Dorian's being detained at the gate. JFK. Horizon staff flagged him for no reason. Jack nearly dropped his fork, his jaw hitting the floor. "You've got to be kidding me!" he exclaimed, disbelief coloring his tone. "Nope," Maggie said, her voice steady. He called it in personally. Jack shoved back from the table, his lunch forgotten. "I'll get Cynthia on it," he said, already dialing. "She's already moving," Maggie replied. "You might want to prep legal just in case." "Legal? Oh, this was bad." Jack didn't even respond. He just hung up and started making calls, his mind racing. If this went public, it could unravel months of work on their new campaign rollout. Press releases were ready, launch videos were in editing, and Dorian Brandt was set to be the face of their fall fresh flight initiative, a beacon of modern food sustainability. And now, that face was being sidelined at an airport gate by someone who had no clue who they were messing with. How could this happen? Back at gate 17, Haley was sweating bullets, the pressure closing in like a vice. She could feel the shift, not just from Mia's icy silence, but from the passengers, who were now openly grumbling about the delay. People were whipping out their phones, checking flight statuses, their impatience crackling in the air. Still no boarding. Then, out of nowhere, a man in a sharp navy suit with a Horizon ID badge strode toward the gate, his pace brisk and purposeful, followed by a woman in striking red heels, her phone still pressed to her ear. "Cynthia!" She ended her call, lowered the phone with deliberate slowness, and surveyed the scene like a general assessing a battlefield. Dorian didn't move a muscle, his eyes tracking her approach, but he didn't step forward. He knew exactly who she was. Oh, the power in that quiet confidence. Cynthia extended her hand, her demeanor calm but direct. "Mr. Brandt, I'm Cynthia Reyes, Executive Director of Regional Operations. May I speak with you privately?" Dorian nodded once, slipping his phone back into his pocket with a fluid motion. "Of course," he said, his voice steady as ever. They stepped a few feet away, leaving Haley frozen behind the desk, her mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. Should she follow? Disappear? She didn't know. Cynthia took a deep breath, her words measured but sincere. "Mr. Brandt, on behalf of Horizon Air, I want to apologize. I've already contacted our internal team to look into this situation. This should not have happened. I'd like to escort you personally onto the flight." Dorian didn't react, no dramatic flourish, no visible relief. He simply asked, "Do you know what seat I was assigned?" Cynthia glanced at her tablet, her fingers swift. Seat 1A. A faint smile tugged at Dorian's lips, subtle but pointed. "First row. Interesting. I was told this lane was for premium passengers only." "Ow!" Cynthia didn't flinch, but the sting of his words was clear. "Again, I apologize," she said, her voice steady. Dorian leaned in slightly, his tone low but piercing. "The issue isn't the mistake, Miss Reyes. It's the assumption behind it." Cynthia swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. Understood she managed, but oh, how that moment must have burned. Dorian wasn't after revenge, he was after truth. Haley stood behind the gate desk, motionless, her headset still clipped to her collar, but she wasn't speaking into it anymore. She watched Cynthia and Dorian, their conversation too quiet to hear but loud enough to shift the entire atmosphere. Passengers had stopped boarding, the monitor still flashing on time, but nothing was moving. Mia avoided Haley's gaze. She didn't need to look. Everyone at the gate could feel it. Something was terribly wrong, and Haley was at the heart of it. Cynthia waved over another man, tall, sandy hair, black lanyard exuding corporate polish. This was Justin Cole, Horizon's legal liaison for East Coast operations, briefed in the elevator and smart enough to avoid empty explanations. He extended his hand to Dorian. Mr. Brandt, I'd like to apologize personally. I understand this experience has been... Dorian cut him off, his voice gentle but firm. I don't need an apology, Mr. Cole. I need you to explain how something like this happens after we sign a $48 million deal. Justin froze, caught off guard. There was no slick response, no PR-approved dodge for that. Cynthia stepped in, her tone conciliatory. Mr. Brandt, we understand the weight of this situation. We're reviewing our staff conduct and sensitivity training procedures, but we'd also like to assure you this isn't a reflection of our values. Dorian raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp. You mean it's not a reflection of the company's values, or it's not a reflection of the gate agent's judgment? Cynthia didn't answer, the silence heavy. He gestured toward Haley, who looked like she might collapse behind the desk. She saw a well-dressed man with a premium ticket and assumed he was in the wrong line not once but repeatedly. Called for security? Escalated the moment I asked a question. You don't have to explain to me what that's about. I've lived it. His words cut deep, a lifetime of experience packed into that quiet indictment. How could they respond to that? Justin cleared his throat, grasping for control. We are prepared to issue a formal apology, should you wish, privately or publicly. Dorian's expression didn't shift. You think I'm here for an apology? He asked, his voice calm but loaded. They hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Then, with no fanfare, he reached into his garment bag and pulled out a thin manila folder, just paper. But oh, the weight it carried! This is a signed copy of our contract, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. My company now supplies every fresh item on your Western and Midwest routes. That includes produce used in your premium lounge services, by the way. So when I say that the person being blocked at this gate is your brand, I mean that literally. He handed the folder to Cynthia, who took it like it was a live grenade. I don't want a tweet. I don't want a letter. I want better, Dorian continued, his voice steady but resolute. Because the next person you treat like a security risk for doing absolutely nothing, they might not have a direct line to your VP. Silence fell thick and heavy. Passengers nearby started whispering. Their curiosity piqued. A woman in the business class lane pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll but clearly recording the scene. Can you imagine the tension? Justin shifted, visibly uncomfortable. We'll initiate an immediate review and make personnel adjustments as necessary. You have my word, he said, his voice tight. Dorian glanced at his watch, his calm unshaken. Good. Then we can all go about our day. Before Cynthia could escort him on board, he turned slightly, his eyes locking onto Haley. She was pale now, clutching her badge with both hands like a shield. Dorian stared at her for a heartbeat, not with anger, but with something far worse, disappointment. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't need to. That look said it all. Cynthia waved to the flight crew, who scrambled to unblock the gate. Dorian was led down the jet bridge, Justin trailing quietly behind him. Back at the gate, Mia stepped beside Haley, her voice low and cutting. You don't get it, she said, her words dripping with frustration. That man's company puts food on half the trays you serve in first class. Haley didn't respond, her silence a mix of shame and shock. But the real moment wasn't in that exchange, it was what happened next. The cabin crew had been briefed, and as Dorian stepped onto the plane, they greeted him not with the usual robotic smile, but with a warmth that felt like a quiet apology. A flight attendant named Jordan offered to take his garment bag, his movements careful and respectful. Another crew member brought him a bottle of water without being asked. Mr. Brandt, if there's anything you need before takeoff, Jordan said, his voice almost a whisper, just say the word. Dorian didn't react much. He wasn't here for gestures. He took his seat in 1A, set the water down without touching it, and exhaled through his nose, not relief, just a controlled, measured breath. Oh, the strength in that moment. Outside, something bizarre was happening. The terminal was grinding to a halt. Passengers were checking the boards more frequently, their confusion growing. First, Gate 1717 status flipped from boarding to delayed. Then, within 10 minutes, 2 more gates nearby followed suit. A ripple effect was spreading, and no one knew why. The truth? Horizon Air was in crisis mode, and Dorian Brandt's quiet call had set it all in motion. How could one man's composure shake an entire airline to its core? Can you believe the chaos that erupted at JFK when one man's quiet strength brought an entire airline to a standstill? At Gate 18, a man in a gray blazer tapped impatiently on the desk, only to be brushed off with a vague excuse about an internal systems review. But oh, it wasn't just Dorian Brandt's flight caught in the storm. Across the concourse, 3 more Horizon Air departures screeched to a halt. No clear reasons, just cryptic phrases like operational hold, technical processing, and crew coordination floating around. The truth? Corporate had slammed the brakes, issuing a soft shutdown, a hushed pause that sent ripples through the terminal. Why? Because one gate agent's snap judgment had sparked a crisis that could have blown up in their faces. Cynthia Reyes, after personally escorting Dorian onto the plane, didn't waste a second. She marched straight into a secure meeting room tucked behind the terminal, her mind racing. Can you imagine the tension? She was on a high-stakes call with legal, HR, and crisis management, the air thick with urgency. The directive was crystal clear. Nothing could leak to the public until every detail was scrutinized: gate logs, staff notes, internal communications, all of it. Every employee who'd crossed paths with Dorian that morning was being pulled aside for questioning. No one dared say it out loud, but the plane wasn't budging until Horizon knew just how deep this damage might cut. Talk about a corporate fire drill. Back on board, Dorian sat in seat 1A, eyes closed, his face a portrait of calm. But don't be fooled, this wasn't serenity. It was hard-earned experience. The kind forged over decades of swallowing stings you're forced to pretend don't hurt. His thoughts drifted to his father, Leonard, who'd once been turned away from a car dealership because the manager sneered, "You don't look like you can afford it." He remembered his first investor meeting in Columbus, where someone mistook him for the valet. And now, after all these years, it was happening again just at 30,000 feet. How does that still sting so much? Jordan, the flight attendant, approached softly. "Mr. Brandt," he said, his voice gentle, "we've been asked to delay departure briefly. They're working through something with the terminal team. We'll keep you updated." Dorian nodded once, unruffled. Jordan hesitated, then added, "I saw what happened out there. It wasn't right." Dorian opened his eyes, meeting Jordan's gaze. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but warm. A brief silence hung between them. Then Jordan spoke again, his tone earnest. "I told my younger brother to watch your talk at the sustainability conference last year. He's studying agressions, and you made it feel so real for him. Just thought you should know." Dorian looked at him, a small, genuine smile breaking through, not forced. "Just human." "I appreciate that," he replied, his words carrying a quiet weight. As Jordan walked away, the pilots emerged from the cockpit, huddling with a senior crew member near the front. Their voices were hushed, but not hushed enough. Dorian caught a snippet. Ground hold, no idea how long. Somewhere in the back, a passenger groaned loudly. "Figures! This airline never gets it together." But Dorian? He didn't flinch. He leaned back, gazing at the clouds drifting outside his window, at peace with his role. He'd done his part, the rest was out of his hands. Can you feel the power in that restraint? 20 minutes later, the internal report landed on Cynthia's desk like a thunderbolt. The gate logs were spotless, no threats, no disturbances, nothing. The only red flag? A single unjustified call from the gate agent to security, with no documented reason. That was enough to seal Haley's fate. By the time Dorian's flight finally began its pushback, she'd been quietly pulled from the floor. No fanfare, no announcement, just gone. Her name vanished from the next day's schedule, a silent consequence of her misstep. Oh, how quickly the tables turned. That afternoon, a photo surfaced online, capturing the moment that defined it all. Dorian standing calmly near the gate, phone to his ear, with a caption that hit like a gut punch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. But the whole airport listened. Stories like this don't always end with a bang, but this one? It left a mark. The plane touched down in San Francisco just after 1:15 p.m. And Dorian, ever unhurried, was among the last to disembark, letting the rush of passengers surge toward ride shares, baggage claims, and connections. He didn't check his phone until he was settled in the back of a sleek black Lincoln, gliding toward the Marriott where the Western Produce Sustainability Summit was in full swing. Notifications flooded in emails from Horizon Air, a text from Maggie noting that their legal team had sent a draft letter, and a link to a local news blog that had caught wind of the JFK incident. Nothing viral, nothing explosive, just a quiet ripple spreading through the right circles. How does one man's dignity spark such a wave? Inside the conference ballroom, the energy was electric, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. Dorian slipped in unnoticed at first, but as he neared the stage for his keynote, a few attendees did a double take, whispering his name. He exchanged quick greetings, shook hands, but kept it strictly business, no mention of the airport drama, no fishing for sympathy. That's just how he rolled. 20 minutes later, he took the stage to a packed room, his presence commanding without effort. His keynote wasn't about Gate 17, not directly. Instead, he wove a compelling tale of resilience in the food supply chain, highlighting how tiny assumptions in sourcing, storage, or delivery can snowball into massive consequences. He shared a story about a Kansas beet farmer who nearly lost his harvest over one missed email, and how that single oversight transformed his company's communication systems. Can you see the parallels? But then he paused, the room hanging on his every word. He scanned the audience, business leaders, suppliers, researchers, logistics experts, and delivered a line that landed like a quiet bombshell. Sometimes the problem isn't the system. Sometimes it's the shortcuts we take in reading people. A hush fell over the crowd. He pressed on, his voice steady but powerful. Whether it's a new grower, a supplier, or someone standing at a gate with a valid boarding pass, what we assume says more about us than it does about them. The room erupted in quiet applause, not a roaring ovation, but real, heartfelt appreciation. As he stepped off the stage, a man from a Seattle distribution firm stopped him, his voice earnest. "Hey, that bit about shortcuts? It hit me harder than I expected." Dorian smiled, his eyes warm. That's where the rot starts in the shortcuts. How does a single sentence carry such weight? Back in New York, Cynthia sat in her office, poring over the internal audit team's report, her jaw tight. Haley's file was flagged, but Dorian hadn't demanded her firing, nor had he asked for compensation or even acknowledged the offer of a public apology. He didn't need to. Horizon's senior staff knew exactly what had gone down and how close they'd come to losing far more than a contract. In the weeks that followed, Horizon quietly partnered with a civil rights advisory group to tackle workplace sensitivity and bias prevention. A few news outlets pieced it together, mentioning Dorian indirectly in a Horizon spokesperson's quote, "Recent events reminded us of the work that still needs to be done." Dorian? He stayed silent, no comments, no posts, no retweets. He just went back to work as if nothing had happened. Can you imagine that kind of grace? When Maggie asked if he'd speak to the press after GQ came calling for an interview, he brushed it off with a simple, "Tell them I'm busy feeding people." Weeks turned to months, but the story lingered not because it went viral, but because it resonated. People who'd been in the terminal that morning shared it over dinner, their voices hushed with awe. Others who saw that photo of Dorian, phone to ear, started using it in talks about silent leadership. Horizon employees whispered about it in break rooms, and gate agents began double-checking their assumptions before reaching for their headsets or calling security without cause. And somewhere in Ohio, Eunice Brandt, a retired grocery worker, read the story online, her heart swelling with pride. Smiling to herself in her cozy kitchen, she said aloud, "That's my son." Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is saying nothing at all. Oh, how my heart aches reading about Dorian Brandt's ordeal at gate 171717. This story isn't just about a delayed flight. It's a gut-punching reminder of how deeply ingrained prejudice still festers in our society, and it makes my blood boil. The way Dorian, a man of immense accomplishment, was judged not by his character or credentials, but by assumptions rooted in bias is infuriating. It's 2025 and we're still letting snap judgments based on appearance dictate how we treat people? Come on! Dorian's quiet strength, his refusal to stoop to anger despite decades of facing this nonsense, is nothing short of heroic. It fills me with awe but also sadness. Why should anyone have to carry that burden with such grace? His story screams for change, for a world where people aren't forced to prove their worth against outdated stereotypes. I'm inspired by his dignity, but I'm also enraged that he had to endure this at all. On a broader level, this makes me reflect on lifestyle and social responsibility. We need to live with intention, challenging our biases daily, whether at an airport gate or in our neighborhoods. It's not enough to say we're fair. We have to actively dismantle the shortcuts we take in judging others. Dorian's keynote about assumptions hit me hard. They reveal more about us than those we judge. Let's embrace a lifestyle of empathy, where we listen, learn, and lift each other up. I'm hopeful for change, but it starts with us right now. No excuses. Let's make stories like Dorian's a relic of the past, not a recurring nightmare.